which is, is working on your mind. That never changes, but the emphasis changes. So in the first stages of practice, given that we're driven by delusions and our crazy body, speech, and mind, or our crazy body and speech, like I call them, our servants of our mind, they just run off and do dumb things in order to fulfill our own demented, self-centered wishes. We think it's normal life, but the Buddha says we're driven by attachment, this bottomless pit of neediness in our mind, this junkie to get what we want, which is why we then get angry when we can't get what we want. This is why we harm others and lie and steal and kill and do all the rest we do. So the first level of practice, don't worry about your mind here, just control your body and speech. It's already stupendous. And that's where we start to learn about this vast kind of this natural law that Buddha has found to be true from his own observation. He didn't make it up. It's not revelation, which is how we think of religion, not like that. It's this natural law that runs the universe. And so we began to look into that. And your mind does it. So you're working on your mind at the same time, but you're mainly controlling your body and speech. Then, given that you're, in a bit of harness, once you've kind of harness your body and speech in junior school, you get to the second scope of the Lam Rim. Now you really become a Buddhist. Now you become your own therapist, as Namayoshi puts it. Now you really begin the job that's unique to being a Buddhist, which is unpack and unravel your mind and distinguish the neuroses from the goodness. That's the bottom line. And again, the whole emphasis in this first part of practice, the wisdom wing, the entire emphasis, the main purpose behind it is to prevent you from creating more negative karma, to prevent you from future suffering. So that's what renunciation means. It's not just some weird giving up something and being depressed and holy. You're giving up suffering and its causes. And whose suffering are you giving up? Your own. Guess what? I mean, like, duh, So the way we misinterpret it is so shocking. We hear it as this vindictive and kind of punitive, and I'm not allowed to do this and not allowed to do that, and I'll get punished. This neurotic, dualistic view we have about it, about morality and ethics. But it's actually, we should be blissed out to live a life of ethics, because it's the cause for us to become happy. The bottom line is you're going to become happy. We can't hear it like that, It's profound when we can. So you continue to work on your mind, but you're the beneficiary. You're the main beneficiary. You do it with bodhicitta if you're on the Mahayana path. That underpins it. But the main explicit beneficiary is you. We've got to get that. And that's what we miss hugely in the West. We don't really think like this. So then we get on to, so as we start to control our body, control our speech, and control our mind, what happens is we become more subdued, more serene, more fulfilled, more joyful. I mean, big surprise. And then and also more stable. And then we kind of keep opening our eyes and realize, oh my God, we're all in the same boat. Look at this crazy world, all these crazies out there, all suffering, just like me, all these crazies harming each other. Because of their delusions, all the poor people who are getting harmed, they don't know because of their own past actions. So we're all in the same boat. And this is why, as I began to discuss yesterday, and let's keep talking about this, without understanding karma, without the junior school and high school, without understanding your mind, without understanding delusions, you cannot get the compassion that Buddha talks about. You just can't. We dump our own compassion onto it. And our compassion is driven by anger, much of it. Because as soon as we see an innocent, and it has to be, like I said 2 days ago, or yesterday it was, the compassion we have is so kind of layered with misconceptions. In other words, we only have compassion for innocent victims. We've got to make sure that you're an innocent victim. If you're an innocent victim, you're allowed to have my compassion, baby. But if you're not, I'm sorry, you deserve what you get. That's how heavy we are. That's the heaviness of our compassion is like that. So even if we do have good heart and we see all the animals being harmed and the little children being harmed, we do have compassion for them, but it turns into anger because we want to find who did it to them, who to blame. So our compassion is driven by, much of it is polluted by blame and anger. We mightn't think so, but when we analyze it the way the Buddhism describes, it's really very evident. It's kind of sobering. So you can't understand Buddha's view of karma. This is a discussion we had so clearly a couple of days ago, I think, Anne. Oh, you mean if I have compassion for Mr. Weinstein, I've got to pat him on the head and sort of think, poor fellow? Because that's what we think of compassion. Oh, the poor thing can't help it. You're an innocent victim. So it doesn't make sense to us to have compassion for horrible people, for the harmers, for the rapists, the terrorists, the murderers, the pedophiles. It makes no sense to us until we understand the first stages of practice in relation to ourself. And that means we have to understand karma in relation to ourself. We have to understand our mind in relation to ourself. And that brings what incredible renunciation. And what that means is compassion for yourself. The Lamas don't call it that, but effectively, when you've got renunciation of suffering and its causes, It means you're sick of your suffering and you want to change. That's the basis. And then you can easily have compassion for others. It is not complicated. And because it's not driven by anger or despair, because right now, if you're a kind of a gentle person and you do have compassion, but we still have this dualistic view of punishment and reward and innocent victims and naughty people. If you're a kind person and you see the world and you see the terrible suffering, you get very distressed and you can't cope. So you want to put your head in the sand or turn away. But if you've got an angry tendency, you want to punch and kick and shout and yell. But they're the same problem. And that's because we've got attachment. But we don't understand that. That's not our analysis in the West. So as Buddhas is so precise, but we won't hear it properly until we really look into these words and look at the definitions of them and understand the Buddha's analysis. It's very precise and quite different from ours. It takes time to see it. It takes time to hear it. So yesterday we looked at the very first of these practices in these series of 11 techniques, which is a combination that Pabonka Rinpoche talks about in Liberation in the Palm of Your Hand. It's a combination of the two main techniques that culminate in bodhicitta on the Mahayana path, tracking right back to our Tisha. And then before that, I think to our Sangha in India. The 6 causes and 1 effect, and then the Lodrong one, the more radical one, the one all the Tibetan lamas love, So these 11 techniques is a combination of both. So these techniques are just these analytical meditations, these contemplations in which we use much logic. And that's a surprise to us, because when we think of meditating on compassion, first of all, when we think of meditation, we think of it as some kind of experience that comes. Oh, I had a lovely meditation today. It's like, you had a lovely bike ride today. You might have had a nice bike ride, but the job is to learn to ride a bike. Whether it's a nice day or not doesn't matter. It's a training. Meditation is training your mind. First concentration, you're training your mind to focus. And then the second mode, to get insight, you're training your mind to unpack and unravel the way things are in order to get some insight into reality. So you've got to squeeze your brain, as Lama-Yeshe says. And there's an ongoing progressive, it's a process, You might have a nice experience one day, but that's not the point. It's to unpack and unravel using logic, basically. These meditations, starting with equanimity, you've got to use logic to argue with ego's absurd misconceptions. And it's surprising to think you try to use logic to get compassion, but you absolutely need that. And why? Is because we're driven at the moment by the illogic of ego grasping, attachment, and aversion, the 3 toxic emotions. We're completely buying into their stories. We don't realize it because they're so deeply ingrained. They're so primordial. Our mind is imbued with those misconceptions. So we really got to do much work to unpack and unravel them, to hear their misconceptions, to hear their stories. Not just to feel the emotions of attachment and the emotions of anger. That's too superficial. That's just the body. And we're very addicted to our bodily feelings. We don't even know what goes on in our mind until it hits our body. That's our problem. Buddha's technique enables us to go beyond the body, to get to hear the trillions of conceptual stories that underpin our our emotions. Emotions are just the tip of the iceberg, and we're addicted to our emotions. But there's the tip of the iceberg. You've got to go deeper, beyond them, to hear the conceptual stories, the misconceptions that inform our emotions. That's when we're really working on our mind. That's when we're being a Buddhist. So the first, like we did yesterday, the first technique is equanimity. It's a very specific use of the word here in the Bodhisattva path. And equanimity is referring to an attitude towards all sentient beings. And this equanimity specifically, like we talked, is when we've got it, is this heartfelt recognition that enemy, friend, and stranger are equal to each other from one point of view. They each want to be happy and they each don't want to suffer. And friend, enemy, strangers is the 3 categories of sentient beings seen through the lenses of our attachment, aversion, and ignorance. So this ignorance, okay, when you look at this, when you go in high school, we look at the mind, the middle scope, we unpack and unravel the mind. We learn, we study Lorig, we learn the mind in Buddhist view. We learn that there are these, all the delusions. The first category, you've got deluded, neurotic, deluded, disturbing, misconception states of mind, anger, attachment. There are three main ones, the three toxic emotions, the three poisons. There are millions of others, but they all subsume to the three. And so ego grasping is the root delusion. And we'll discuss this today before we finish. That's going to be our final talk today. Then we'll cover the whole lamrim, you know. Look into wisdom. How do we annihilate the root delusion? How do we unpack and unravel and deconstruct and get rid of the root delusion, which is what we're heading for. All the teachings are leading to this. So the three main delusions, the root one literally is called ignorance, okay? But it's like obviously a specific use of that word. It's ignorance, a primordially deep, fundamental root ignorance that causes us not to know how everything actually, finally, ultimately exists. That's a huge, grand, extraordinary statement, isn't it, you know? But this is what Buddha's dealing with. And he says we all have to understand this because that's how we get rid of suffering. So that ignorance has different functions. So on the first scope of practice, where Buddha exhorts us to refrain from 10 negative actions, we mainly discussed the first 7, which is the 3 of the body and the 4 of the speech. But the last 3 are, like, I like to say it this way, are sort of the beginnings of Buddha's getting us to work on our mind. That doesn't really happen until we get to the middle scope, to high school. But the last 3 of these 10, which are these general instructions or, you know, advice, because Buddha's not a boss. He can't force us. We choose to not do these things. They're advice. And the last 3 are where he gets us to, you know, refrain from the really heavy duty level of the 3 poisons. So he gets us to try and kind of harness the crazy heavy duty craving energy, which is this intense, extra painful level of attachment. Then he gets us to refrain from the heavy duty level of anger, which is when you can't let it go and you even want the person to suffer. I mean, look at the world, you know, ill will, malice, heavy duty level of anger. And the third one, the heavy duty level of the root delusion at this level is a kind of deep type of ignorance, like a fundamentalist kind of mind. Everything's very black and white. Everything's very fixed. That's a function of very powerful ego grasping, a very gross level of ego grasping. It's like basically you're a very ignorant person. You think of people who are very thick and ignorant. This ignorance is a very specific function of the ego grasping. Like you can't see between you can't see, but you know, you can't see things from a different perspective. You're very fundamentalist, or fundamentalist religion, fundamentalist football follower, fundamentalist politician, fundamentalist anything. Very narrow-minded mind, a very deeply ignorant mind, you know, eye for an eye, that kind of thing. So that's a function, a particular aspect of this root delusion that they describe in the first stages of practice, which we're trying to harness. Now in the compassion wing, when we talk about enemy, friend, and stranger, again, it's the 3 delusions. Attachment, objects of attachment are called friends. Object of aversion are called enemies. Object of ignorance in this framework it's more like an indifference. The way it manifests here is like an indifference, like I couldn't care less. They're both, so this fundamental ignorance, this narrow-mindedness, and this couldn't care less are both manifestations of the root ignorance, the root ignorance. So here, then we can see with friends, the object of our attachment, the person looks divine, you adore them, you can't stop wanting to be with them, and they're the one we do have love and compassion for. If we have any virtue at all, it's for that category. Then we've got the ones we don't like, either just the person who irritates you to the person you absolutely loathe. That's called anger. Aversion, bare bones state of mind of anger is aversion, you know, and a very volatile level of that is anger. That's called enemy. Like I say, we mightn't use that word in daily life, but it's a useful label here for people we have aversion for. Then the third category, obviously, is 99.99% of the universe, everybody else. And who are they? They're called strangers. And how do we feel about them? We couldn't care less. The ones who fill our mind are enemies and friends. You know, we think about them all the time. But strangers don't even come into your radar. Why? It's very logical. Why do you adore your friend? Because they do what your attachment wants. You've got a vested interest in it. Why do you loathe your enemy? Because they dared to do what your attachment didn't want. They hurt you. They harmed you. The stranger doesn't either, so they don't even come into our radar. That's 99% of the universe. They could all drop dead, and if we didn't hear about it, we would not even know or care. I always mention this particular story one time on my iPad a few years ago. In my New York Times, you know, how on the homepage, you have the heading and then it's a paragraph. Well, the heading, I saw it in the corner of my eye. The heading said, 350 people die in ferry accident in Tasmania. Well, I went, oh, because my people, right? And I read the story. But then when I opened the real story, I saw that it actually said Tanzania, not Tasmania. I went, oh, it's okay. Because, you know, I wouldn't know where Tanzania is. It's not my people. So I caught myself, of course, and I had compassion and tried to read about this ferry accident in Tanzania, not Tasmania, because it's not my people. They're strangers. So I had to think, where's Tanzania? I had to read the story. But if it's Tasmanians, I know it. You know, I was imagining one of those princess boats going down in between Melbourne and Hobart or somewhere, or Launceston, wherever it goes. But it's strangers. That's how we are. It's natural, because we've got attachment, aversion, and ignorance. Join the universe. So we began looking at that yesterday. And this is the crucial first step, because until we cultivate this logic that recognizes that the friend, the enemy, and the stranger and this is the point, from their point of view, not mine. I mean, our view is just, I see them through my lenses, and I see them all and this is the point. Like I said yesterday, we should be embarrassed. We see the entire universe in terms of how they fulfill my needs. So a friend is divine because they fulfill my needs. An enemy goes the opposite, so I can't stand them. And strangers do neither, so I couldn't care less. I mean, we should be embarrassed, but it's so normal. I mean, ants, dogs, monkeys, all sentient beings are like this because we're all driven by these three main delusions. We're all in samsara. So just this alone, this equanimity is a profound analysis. But like I said yesterday, we can be very wishy-washy about, oh, everyone's equal. No, they're not. What do you mean by equal? Some people are fat, some people are thin, some people are monsters, some people are saints. What are you going to be equal in terms of what? And this is the one that's so clear. Not clear initially. It's something that Buddha basically says. Everybody in the universe wants to be happy. Everybody in the universe wants not to suffer. That's one thing that we all have in common. We're driven by the wish to be happy. And then when you understand that, at least gives you an insight into why Mr. Trump does what he does, why Mr. Weinstein does what he does, why whoever it is does what they do to harm sentient beings. Why would a lion want to eat you for breakfast? They're not trying to be evil. They're just driven by their attachment, and they're driven by their aggression and their karmic imprint to eat you for breakfast. So the same with Mr. Weinstein. He's driven by his ridiculous delusions. But you won't understand that, like I said, until you are humble enough to see how you are driven by your delusions. And we do not see this. We have this hubris. We're like such a saint, and the whole world is full of these monsters out there. It shows we do not know our own minds, you know. That's why the wisdom wing's got to come first. It's got to come first. It's not possible otherwise. So having this equanimity means, yeah, there is a person who's horrible. The enemy did indeed harm you. That ex-husband was horrible to you. Nobody argues with that. Buddha's not arguing with that fact. The person who you adore might be a divine person. But this is not the issue here. In other words, what we're aiming for with this analysis, which is the foundation upon which we will build love, compassion, great compassion, and bodhicitta, is this recognition beyond what they do to me. It's just too personal. We get ourselves out of the equation, and we learn to get ourselves completely out of the way and get to see these three people. And from one point of view, they are the same as each other. Might be many, but this one is the point. They each want to be happy and each don't want to suffer. And they're each driven by the wish to get happiness and avoid suffering, which includes harming you if they're the enemy, and includes being kind to you if they're your friend. So we use that personal one as the logic for why we love a person and hate a person. I mean, it's just self-centered. I'm sorry, it's very simple. It's normal, but it's self-centered. So to get yourself out of the equation is the whole point. And you use these different logical analyses to try and prove how these people are the same as each other. I mean, I use that one simple example. When Fred was a stranger, I couldn't have cared less about him when I heard about his migraines. But he suffered just as much whether I loved him or not. The fact that he was my stranger had no benefit, no effect on his terrible migraines. But when he was my boyfriend, suddenly I cared passionately about his migraines. But if you asked him how his migraines were, he would have given you the same answer as when he was a stranger. No different from his side. And when he's my enemy, because he gave me up for a younger version, now I hope he suffers with his migraines. But he suffers exactly the same. So the three different people, the enemy, the friend, and the stranger, they all want to be happy and don't want to suffer. You've got to see the logic of this. And again, you won't see that until you see your own mind. So what you do with that, that's just the first step here. This is the first step to establish. From then, the next one in this little series of 11 techniques is hilarious for us in the West. We think it's like a cosmic joke, like science fiction. The next little point we need to contemplate, you just need your calculator for this one. All sentient beings have been my mum. I mean, we think in the West, what are we trying to do? Make us suffer? We think our mums are the cause of all our pain. I mean, some people love their mums, but they're always rare. No, it's just an example, as His Holiness said, of a person who probably nurtured you and took care of you. So we might think that our mother did, but there's another, we'll get to the third point and we can try and analyze that because it's a very good meditation to do. So it's just an example of a person who's taken care of you. So as Dalai Lama said, if you don't think of your mum, think of your dad. Think of somebody who's nurtured you. It's just an example, and especially coming from Asia where they revere mummies, you know. So then the third step is the point now. Or the third step, there's 2 points there, 3A and 3B. 3A is the mother is kind. So the logic being, if all beings have been your mum, then the mother's kind, then all beings have been kind to you. And you hear a lot in the Tibetan literature, the mother sentient beings, the mother sentient beings. It's a massive, powerful thing to analyze. So this third step is really interesting. Let's analyze it from our point of view. First of all, what does it mean, your mother's kind? I mean, your mum might be what we think is kind. And what, you know, and this is the trouble, what we think is a kind person, guess what? I'm sorry to embarrass you all, is a person who does what you want. I mean, good Lord, you know. Oh, I have such a kind mother. I mean, she adores you and looks after you and takes care of you. And she wasn't a fanatic and a junkie and possessive and an alcoholic who beat you and rejected you. No, she loved you every minute and you happened to love her. You had wonderful, virtuous karma together where you get along well. So you think that's a kind person. So that's our general definition of a kind person, a person who does what I want. I'm sorry to be embarrassing. You know, I go to the cafe, order my chocolate cake, and she smiles at me and gives me a discount and extra cream. Of course, I'll say she's kind. Even if she cracks jokes about this fat old Buddhist nun, you know, behind my back, I don't care. I got what I wanted. So our view of kind is very self-centered in general. Think about it. So what's it mean here? It's not the way we think. What here they're saying is a person is kind. It's a very different definition. If you hear Lama Zopa talk, you've got to squeeze your brain to get it. It's you know, like, for example, if your mum, let's say, got depressed easily, my mum got depressed, you know, she had a hard life and difficult times and her daddy didn't behave nicely and she hadn't have enough money and she had worked day and night to get us all, sent us off to the fancy Catholic convents. I always joke that she probably owes the bills 50, 60, 70 years later. I mean, she did her best, my darling mum, with her 7 babies and her, you know, we had to have kind of, anyway, whatever, we were so poor. So anyway, she worked really hard. So of course you criticize your mother, you know. She got depressed. So when I think about it, all the more reason to appreciate my mother. If she was a happy, marvelous person with a divine husband and money in the bank and she had a steady mind, it would be easy for her to be loving and kind to me. But it was extra hard for her to be loving and kind in the face of all these obstacles and problems and difficulties. So you should even appreciate your mother more if she's neurotic, because she had to do the fact that she did anything at all for you. And that's what we don't think, because part of our problem, this is the point that somebody brought up yesterday about people, because person did 4 different things wrong. What we do is because of anger exaggerates their ugliness. And then you paint the whole person with that brush, don't we? So that's the thing with our mother. I mean, I remember vividly until I was about 12. My mother was like a saint. I adored my mother. That's what attachment is. I was in love with my mum, basically. She was perfect. But as I got older, I started to find fault. And I remember, you know, I say this, but I remember the moment, it was a shock in my mind. I remember the moment I first had a negative thought about my mother. It was shocking to me, but it was downhill from there. Once I got in the habit of it. So first you adore your mother, she's a saint. Then suddenly she's a sinner and you can't stand the sight of your mother and you blame her for every single thing. But this is because we have attachment and anger. I mean, excuse me, join the universe, but we're so caught up in our stories. So when you have anger for your mother, you only remember the bad things. When you're in love with your mother, you only remember the good things. This is how attachment and anger work. So it's a very good meditation here, especially if you think your mother really was unkind, and she probably was unkind. Some mothers are terrible. They do terrible things. There's no argument there. So it's a very powerful practice for all of us. But start to think about, remember, make a list of the things that she did that helped you, that supported you. Well, you know, one of the commonest ones, I always quote this, many people were given away at birth. And some women, some people, sorry, not women, people suffer terribly because of this. You have this terrible pain of rejection, you know, all your life you feel you've been rejected. So first of all, that's why in junior school you learn about karma. You start to take responsibility for that. And then when you understand your mind, you understand this deep sense of rejection, of being rejected. You understand it's because of attachment. So here in the compassion wing, you're able to then recognize, I mean, you know, that yes, your mother gave you away for sure. But, you know, you've already worked with this, with karma and your own mind. So here you can then remember some good things she did. Now, I guarantee most people who have this suffering about their mother giving them away never bother to think that she actually didn't abort you. This should be enough reason to weep with gratitude every day for your mother. Someone told me years ago, a German man, years ago, he said when he was about 40, his mother told him, never before had he heard it, that she was in the hospital ready to have an abortion. Everything was organized. She was in there and she remembers standing up and going from one room to the other, and she stopped in her tracks and she changed her mind. It completely blew his mind. He valued his life and his mother from that second forward in a way that he never had before. Like a miracle, you know. So, you know, your mother didn't abort you. I mean, I have many friends, like back in the 60s, some friends, you know, I had an abortion. A couple of my sisters had abortions. Oh, I have an abortion, we'd say. She'd say no, and she didn't. She risked losing a boyfriend. It was in the 60s. She was 17. She had the child. She was a Catholic. She decided, I will not have an abortion. So she gave the child away, and she suffered terribly because of it. And then when she met the child later, the child rejected her again. The pain was unbearable. But she didn't, that girl, I guarantee, would never think once that this woman ever made a decision not to abort her. That's unbelievable. That's really incredible. Whoever thinks that. So think of some of the things that your mother did for you, especially if she's neurotic. The fact that you're still alive indicates she didn't abort you. She must have taken care of you sometime, wiped your bottom, fed you, woke up in the middle of the night. All the more reason to thank her when she was depressed and unhappy, or a junkie or an alcoholic. I mean, it's just a question of view, you know, and here, having done the work in karma and the next level, knowing your own mind and karma, that's easy here at this level. If you haven't done the earlier work, this is not easy for you. That's why you've got to prepare yourself. The compassion wing is university, not for nothing. So there's so many ways to change your way you see things. And again, when we understand attachment, and in our culture, because we think our mother made us, and because we have this hubris of attachment, which is this sense of entitlement that my mother, for whatever reason, has to be a saint. My mother has to be perfect. We are so shocked when we discover our mother was less than perfect and actually did things to harm me. We're so shocked by that, and we will never forgive her. But when we understand karma, it completely changes everything. So it's a powerful contemplation to do, to literally paint a new picture of your mother. Because if the picture we have now is anger, and I'm not saying she was not neurotic. I'm not saying she didn't harm you. I'm not saying that. But she also did other things. There's no question. So it's a very powerful meditation to do. And then, of course, the deduction is, if all beings have been your mum, they've all been kind. So the 3B is another meditation, and it seems initially even more absurd. And it goes like this. All beings...
Yeah, you too. Thank you.
Sorry about that. Good to go.
Okay, everybody, what happened there? Go. So, right. You know, the second one, 3B, if you like, is all beings are kind. This is like hilarious. What are you talking about? This is based on dependent arising. So you think about this. What this is saying is this. Since we were conceived up until now, you think about this. This is scientific truth. There is not a single thing that has facilitated my life that isn't the result of the work and even the life and death of countless sentient beings. This is completely logical, but we never think about it. Okay, if you get, for example, you think of anything, even this little body of yours, the one that we think is definitely me and mine. But what is the source of this body? Well, my mother, you know, she had to have sex with my father. Right? The egg and sperm came together, and then my consciousness came from before and ran like a magnet to that egg and sperm in her fallopian tube or wherever it joins it. And that then my little body began to grow. Well, what made my body grow? First of all, it was daddy's sperm and mummy's egg. It was just my consciousness. I needed a base to fall into, and they provided me with an egg and a sperm. Well, already, thank you, mummy and daddy. Now, what mummy did was she started to eat to keep her body healthy, and her body turned into my body. Because my little baby, mine was in there, and her little body, my little body started to grow. And what was my body? Well, you know, my mother ate meat and fish. So all my little body that came out after 7 months, apparently it was 7 months, eager to get out, whatever happened, I forget. But, you know, that body that I think is me and mine was just a mountain of fishes and cows and chickens, and then all the little veggies and the creatures that died for the veggies. It turned into her mouth, and it turned into my body. Where's my precious body? It's the handiwork of countless sentient beings. That's just your body before you start your life. And since that time, the people took care of me in the Mercy Hospital. The nuns put a little blanket around me, no doubt. My mother fed me milk, but without that, I wouldn't exist. Then I got a little older, and I could see I couldn't see properly, so they gave me glasses. I mean, without my glasses, I can't see a thing. Since I was like 1.5, you know, my little eyes have been fixed. I can see things like a miracle. So all the people who make glasses, the people who've come up with clever, I mean, because I'm so long-sighted, about 13 plus in the right eye, if I had to have glass like they used to when I was little, it'd be like a saucer on my eye. But I have these clever people who make thin, fine material now. All the sentient beings who make my glasses, all the sentient beings who make our clothing. This is wool. How many creatures gave their wool? I mean, it's logic. There's not a single thing, the food, the clothing, the things we use, the house, everything is the handiwork of sentient beings. It's a fact. It's a fact. It's a scientific fact. But we don't think about it. We're prepared to say thank you if we get what we want. I'm prepared to say thank you and think of the cook in the restaurant when I get my my discount on my delicious chocolate cake and the extra cream. I'll be happy to thank the cook and thank the waiter. But if I don't get what I want, I'm not going to thank anybody. It's the handiwork of other people. This is emptiness. This is dependent arising. And this is provable. This is lie. This is not religion. This is fact. But we don't think about it. Why? Because we see the world again through the lenses of our needs. We're prepared to say thank you if you get what you want. Like I appreciate my iPad because I'm a fan of Steve Jobs. I love Steve Jobs. I'm appreciating it. But it was, you know, you give me the other one, the Samsung. I'm not going to appreciate it. That's not what I want. That's not what I want. How disgusting, you know. If I get what I want, I'm prepared to appreciate. Just for a moment. But we're mainly driven by attachment to get what I want, you know. That's what's so shocking. It's hard to hear this because it seems like a huge expectation for us to have all this awareness of all the people who are kind and helpful. I mean, I often think, you know, when I go to buy my jar of Vegemite, as soon as I walk into the supermarket, already I should be weeping with happiness and kindness, all the people who grease the doors. So when I walk on the thing, the door opens. I don't bump into it because, you know, they open the doors. I walk down and where's the Vegemite aisle? I look up and there's a sign, Vegemite, you know. Someone did the typography on that sign. Someone put the sign up there. Someone thought about where to put the Vegemite. When you get there, every single piece of food now has this complicated analysis of all its contents and the vitamins and the this and the that, and it's gluten-free or this. Someone's done all this hard work. And then when I look at the boring old design of the Vegemite jar, which I don't care because I like my Vegemite, the ugly black and white, whoever designed it, God knows, it must be 1930, but still, it's famous. We know that. You recognize your Vegemite. Someone did the typography, you know, somebody did the work, someone created the font, someone typed it, someone proofread it, someone wrote the words so it's coherent. I mean, all these are sentient beings, all little busy human beings and busy little animals all working hard to get a jar of Vegemite. This is not wrong. This is true, but we only see if I just see what I want. I get annoyed if I don't have the right size or the right price, because I just see we see everything through the lenses of what I want. And it's normal. We don't go around being monsters to people. This is normal attachment. And that's why Buddha's view is so shocking to us initially, to think that this ordinary attachment is delusion, you know. So here in the compassion wing, we move that mind. We hear it now, but we go back automatic to the default mode of attachment as soon as we stop listening to these words, because we're so deeply ingrained that the attachment and getting what I want and self-cherishing are so deeply instinctive in us. So we've got to chip away bit by baby bit, you know. I mean, they talk about the bodhisattva always crying one. He had the realization of this. Whatever he saw, he burst into tears because he saw it was the handiwork of sentient beings. There's good examples. My mother, and all mothers are the same, I'm quite sure. She had 7 babies. She actually had 8, but 1 died. And she kept everything of her children. And this is normal. Kept the booties and kept every little lock of hair when they were babies and kept all our little exam, you know, our things from school. I mean, I always remember this dumb drawing I did when I was a little girl. I mean, I wasn't an artist, you know, this dumb little drawing of a pot plant. And I wrote on it, pop plan. You know how parents are. I mean, she never forgot this little drawing of little Bobsy's pop plan. So if I saw that in, you know, if I saw that in one of the op shops, I'd throw it in the bin. There's no intrinsic value. But if my mother saw that drawing, you never would dare to tear it up and throw it away. Because why? Because she saw the handiwork of her precious Bobsy. That's how bodhisattvas are about everybody. So way to go, people, you know. The work of sentient beings. So all beings are kind. So the number 4 is the conclusion to come to from this one, these 3. It's a determination, this powerful determination. I must repay this kindness. This is already the powerful motivation to want to continue working on developing love, compassion, great compassion, and bodhicitta. This is a powerful motivator. I must repay this kindness. And the next ones are coming from the exchanging self for others one. So the next one, and people stay in meditation retreat for years doing all these contemplations, you know, until they become absolutely, totally oneness with their minds and make this, and they achieve bodhicitta, you know. So this next one is now, we're doing this gradual shift towards this whole attitude called exchanging self for others, meaning we're aiming to cherish others more than self. Now, because of attachment, because of ego grasping, because of delusions, we obviously put self first. We know, I mean, we can see this is because of these attachments. We know that we have some semblance of putting others first. We know that. Some people, we see that in our daily lives. We try so hard. And that's what we're trying to aim to do here, but in a really radical way, where it becomes not just occasionally, and not just for your beloved children or your hubby, but for every sentient being, you know. That's the part that sounds so shocking to us. Just have to have a drink. So here, the very first in these steps is to think about, use logic to try and analyze how now it's the same as equanimity, but it's now the 3 people, all sentient beings in equanimity is equal to each other. But here now we're starting to refer them to ourselves, that all these other people out there are the same as me in wanting happiness and not wanting suffering. So you learn to see the truth of this. And this already becomes very scary, because if it's true, they're the same as me, then you have to start asking, why would I put me first then? This, you know, and this is not easy to see, because the instinct of ego grasping, which asserts a separate intrinsic me, then has masses of attachment to get what the me wants. And these are primordially deep. They're completely instinctive. And then when we're seeing now in the compassion wing that because of this attachment, I put me first, we defend our right to do this, even as we're saying these words. Well, of course I put me first. If I don't put me first, who will? I mean, this is deeply instinctive within us. It's scary to even think, to consider this next point even, that if everybody is the same as me in wanting to be happy and not wanting to suffer, you've got to start to realize the logic here is, well, why would I put me first if they're the same as me? The words are so easy. I mean, emptiness, you've got to squeeze your brain. The words are beyond simple, but experientially, emotionally, this is harder than emptiness, I swear. So, there's masses of contemplation on this point. You use as much logic as you can for this to gradually sink into you, to become an actual truth, Then the next little step, it's very incremental, step by step. The next logic to think is now to look at the disadvantages to me of cherishing me first. This is initially completely hard to hear, because we assume, of course, I have to put me first. Of course, if I want an ice cream, I don't wait for someone to offer me an ice cream. I'd starve. We naturally think I've got to go to the shop and ask for an ice cream. So we sort of get defensive. What do you mean I shouldn't put me first? And we understand it, because when it comes to the crunch, and we do try to do the other, we know how painful it is, The sense of what about me is very powerful. So this next one is to see the disadvantages. This sounds so peculiar, like it sounds like you're being selfish. That we have to think about the disadvantages to me, just from our own perspective. Look at the disadvantages of being self-centered. So if you can't think of it for yourself, it's easy to think about other people. Look at other people who are very self-centered, very egocentric, very selfish. You can see it easily. Look at the disadvantages to them. Nobody likes them. They never get what they want. They're always complaining. People don't like being around them. They're miserable. That's because they're always thinking, poor me. And it's very cruel, this talk. It's very close to home, It feels very difficult. And this is why these type of techniques, this way of thinking is, unless we have done the work of abiding by the laws of karma and understanding it deeply and begin to take responsibility for who we are, and unless we've started to unpack and unravel our mind and understand attachment and aversion and the other delusions really well, and have become from this a very self-respectful, confident person. If you haven't done that work, these are very unhappy things to hear. They're not for you. This stuff, it seems so simple. Put others first. The words are so easy, but if we have not done the first part of the work, we literally cannot hear it. And then even the other way to hear, many people spend their lives being doormats. So they think, when they hear this, they think, but I've been doing that all my life, and look where it's got me. People misuse me, they abuse me, they insult me, I get trodden down, and this is a really common experience in our culture. And that's because we haven't done the earlier work. We just can't hear these teachings. This is not a joke to say these teachings are advanced. We just think they sound cute and nice, oh yeah, think of others. We've got to understand it logically. There's a great depth of teachings that we have to input into our mind first to hear this properly. It's really very powerful. The next one is, look at the advantages to me of putting others first. So again, one of the views we have is that sounds so selfish. We're embarrassed to think that, but it's intelligent. I mean, His Holiness said, which is a similar idea. I remember when I first heard all these teachings back in Chen Raising Institute, when I first heard the teachings when I was 30 something, and Lama's over one whole month, Lamrim. I didn't know somebody's talking about much of the time. I heard these words was just so complicated. And I couldn't, when he started talking about bodhicitta and the qualities of bodhisattvas, and it was like science fiction to me. I couldn't find a way to comprehend it. I couldn't get it, And I remember reading His Holiness say, if you want to benefit others, practice compassion. If you want to benefit yourself, practice compassion. So we're not even at compassion yet. We're studying the fourth point. The compassion is like number 8. We're moving towards it inexorably, these incremental little steps. They sound so cute and simple, but they are profound. So it's, in other words, see, the advantage to us of developing virtue, of thinking of others, of learning to be loving and patient and kind. It's very, if we haven't done the work first, if we haven't controlled our body and speech, and if we haven't understood our own attachment, and if we haven't understood our own hurt and our own anger and our own depression and our own jealousy and the pain, the real pain that is, if we haven't begun to unpack that, these teachings are impossible to hear. Just impossible. Very simple. Compassion is not enough. You've got to have wisdom. So seeing, if again, don't want to think about yourself, look at other people. Happy people, kind people, loving people. People adore them. And they're not being doormats. So that's where we have to understand attachment. We are a doormat because our attachment, our addiction is to seeing ourselves as mummy's little helper. And I'm not being critical because the kindness you have is real. But what we haven't understood, what you haven't understood is it's still driven by attachment. Your need to be seen as a good girl. That drives us, but we can't distinguish that. And that's how we talked before. We have to learn to see our mind, and we have to distinguish between the neuroses and the virtues. This is unique to Buddha's view of the mind, I tell you. Don't just gloss it over. It's profound. So nothing wrong with compassion, nothing wrong with being mummy's little helper, but the problem is attachment to being seen as a good girl. And that makes you weak and a victim and vulnerable, and that's why you get trodden on and treated like a doormat. You do not get treated like a doormat if you have compassion and love, because if you've got real compassion and love and you've done the wisdom work, you are a powerful, easygoing, happy, wonderful human being, stable and clear. So we have to know our minds so well. So now, the next one we get to, maybe that came before. I forget the order, I'm sorry. No, the one maybe after thinking of the advantage. Oh no, maybe the next one now is see yourself as equal to others. Maybe that's what I said before. I got a bit confused. I have to look up the list. I'm sorry, I get it wrong. I have to find it first. I forget the order. Just a second. I don't know where to find it. I've got no idea. I got lost. Never mind. You have to look it up yourselves and get it right. I'm misleading you maybe. But one of the ones is you have to see that everyone is equal to you. Maybe that's what we said before. And then, yeah, that comes before. From when you see that others.
You said everyone was.
I said it before already.
Putting others above you, I think, in that previous section, Robina, I think.
What?
I think you were saying we should place others first.
No. We haven't got to, we're heading to that. But in these steps, one I said where you start to think that everybody's the same as you. That's the one. That's where you equalize yourself with others. And then you start moving towards exchanging yourself for others by next thinking the disadvantages of putting yourself first, and then the advantages of putting others first. And then slowly we're moving now towards developing this one of exchanging self for others. And so we now get to this technique that's it's really famous, and lots of Westerners love it. It's a really advanced technique, but for some reason Westerners love it. It's called Tonglen. It's in this practice that we do this job of finally making this paradigm shift of putting others first, and then that culminates in bodhicitta. I'm sure I've missed out some steps, I have for sure, but never mind. So this technique, it's outrageous. Tonglen, giving, taking. So it's simply an attitude, like all these things we've talked about. They're attitudes that by using logic to argue with ego's misconceptions, you gradually move into these attitudes and they become real experiences for you, which you have to practice, you know, in personal meditation and in your daily life. So Tonglen, giving and taking, this is the practice where now you develop love and you develop compassion. Love and compassion. All of these lead to this. Love is, may you be happy. And we're talking all sentient beings here. We've got that organized back in equanimity. Everybody. May you be happy. Compassion is, may you not suffer. Now, in Tonglen, you have this outrageous, brave attitude that's saying, you know what? I'd rather have your suffering than you. So I'll take it upon myself. And I would rather you have happiness than me. So I will give you my qualities, my goodness, my health, my wealth, whatever. It's an outrageous concept. I mean, it's like madness, you know. And this is the practice. You can do it, and you can do it, you know, using your breath. It's a very nice meditation to do. When you start with any person, you start with a person. I mean, even Pabonka Rinpoche says in the morning, if you do this meditation, you start by visualizing yourself in the afternoon with a headache, even yourself. So you vision, when you breathe in, you imagine taking upon yourself that suffering, or forget about even yourself, but let's say your beloved friend with a headache, you visualize them. And then when you breathe in, first of all, there's many ways you do this. You can be very creative, you know, like you can visualize like a little rock at your heart, which is your self-cherishing, your self-centeredness, your selfishness. So when you breathe in, you imagine breathing off the person, their headache, let's say, their suffering. And you want, the attitude is not, so okay, what this meditation is not, it is not a healing technique. Commonly people do it as if it's a method to stop the person getting a headache. It's not that. It's not that. There's lots of healing techniques. Pray to the medicine Buddha, do all sorts of things. This is a really specific technique that's a training for you to smash your self-cherishing. So the attitude is you want, if I could, I would rather have the headache than you have it. You hear parents talk like this about their children, you know. And I remember one of my friends in prison, my crazy Mexican ex-gangster friends, Richie. When he first wrote to me like 20 years ago. I remember him saying, he's an outrageous guy, you know, completely crazy gangster. When I first met him, I always tell the story. When I first met him, like 98 or 97, I think, I went to visit him. He'd written letters. He'd heard about me and he started writing letters, and he told me he was a very laid back guy. But when he gets angry, he gets very angry. So anyway, but he liked doing Tara. All these Latinos really like meditating on Tara. Anyway, I went to see him for the first time, and there he was in the top security section. There was glass between us. I was on the phone. And I said, how's your anger, Richie? And he kind of blushed under his tattoos. He had tats all over his face, you know, like all the gangsters do. And he blushed under his tattoos and he said, oh, Robina, I have to confess, I had a fight with my cellie. In California, your cellmates called us cellie. I had a fight with my cellie this morning, and I put his head down the toilet. But then he said, really innocently, he said, Robina, I took it out again. I mean, and I thought, well, wow, he didn't kill a fourth person. I was so happy for him. That's practice, you know. There is this crazy Mexican gangster who's killed several people on the streets of Los Angeles, covered in tats, in top security in his cell 23 hours a day, trying to practice Dharma. And he's having a fight with the guy, and he got his head down the toilet, and he consciously takes it out. He consciously doesn't kill him. I thought, wow, that's practice. Then he had the guy thrown out of the cell, and he sat him down and did his Tara meditation. So, you know, that's a practitioner. I was very impressed. Anyway, he wrote years later about something because he said he had AIDS. No, HIV or something. No, I forget. Maybe a tendency. I forget. His liver wasn't healthy. A lot of these guys are living in these top security places where there's no light, no sun for years on end. You know, they're sitting in these ugly cells. So he was sick. And he said, well, you know, maybe I was thinking, Robina, that I should, two things he said. He said, maybe I should not take medicine. So I should get sick and die, and that'll help me purify my negative karma, you know, because he'd been on gangs and killing people. It was incredible thought to have that. But also he thought, because these young Mexicans coming in at the age of 14 and 15 to these prisons with long sentences, it's really terrible, you know. And so he said, maybe he said, I wish I could, you know, because I've got this long sentence. I wish, you know, when my people come into prison, I wish I could take on their sentence from me and they leave prison. I mean, that's a profound thought to have, you know. I mean, parents have it for their children. That's unbelievable, outrageous compassion, you know. So this, anyway, when you're doing this technique, it's not a healing technique, and it's not that you're trying to get a headache. I mean, that is absurd. That's ludicrous. You're acting with the courage that is thinking, if I could, I would rather have the headache than you. So when you do the meditation, you're thinking of the person with their suffering, and you breathe, you're wanting to breathe it off them. And then you happily breathe it in, this yucky smoke, and imagine it going down and smashing your self-cherishing. And then when you breathe out, you visualize blissful light and you give them health and wealth and happiness and everything they need. So you want to take off their suffering. And as you're doing this, you're happy that they're not suffering. And when you give them, you're happy that they're happy. That's what love and compassion is. You know, it's an outrageous technique. Amazing. People do spend years in meditation on this, in retreat, you know. And what that brings eventually is bodhicitta. This paradigm shift one day will occur when no longer the first moment of bodhicitta, no longer the thought of the ordinary I will ever occur, only the thought of others. This is like inconceivable in our ordinary psychological models. That's why you've got to do it incrementally, slowly, based on the wisdom wing, on the, you know, karma, the mind, and these step by step, these techniques, you know. So maybe some questions now. I have a 5-minute break, whichever you prefer. A couple of questions first.
Sure, let's start with this one. As all beings have been your mother, would that mean that they all behave differently to the mother of this life? Or because of karma, are the mother's behaviors repeated until we negate our negative karma?
Will you say it again, please? I'm a bit confused.
Sure.
And I have to blow my nose. Hang on, let me just blow my nose. Excuse me. Say it again.
As all beings have been your mother,
Yep.
would that mean that they behave differently to the mother of this life? Or
Hang on, sorry, what? Who behaved differently to the mother of this life?
as all beings have been your mother, would that mean they behave differently to the mother of this life?
But I mean, there's trillions of mothers. You only meet one at a time. Okay, so wait a minute. All beings have been my mum.
Yep.
Then in this life, I've got a particular mum.
Yep.
So what's the question?
Would they behave differently in this life, or because of
Who?
karma?
The person who is the daughter or the son or all the mothers?
I believe
I can't hear the question.
It's me,
Sorry.
Robina. It's Sue.
Who?
Ask the question. Sue,
Where are you, Sue? I can't see you.
can
Okay,
you
talk
see
to me. Sue. Ask me the question, darling.
All beings have been our mothers. So we've had previous mothers in
Countless
past
sentient beings.
life.
Everybody. I'll put it this way: in this life, Sue, if you look around, the meanies and the pythons and the snakes and the cockroaches and the beloved husbands and the horrible ex-husbands, they've all been your mum in a past life, one life or another. So then, question:
If you had a shit mother in this life, does that mean you'll always have a shit mother?
Why should
Excuse
that
my
be?
language.
But why should that be? What do you mean? Why should that be? Because each life we have a different karmic connection with different people, and it's very specific. So you know yourself. Okay, let me ask you a question. In this life, have you got some people who adore you and you have a lovely friendship with?
Yes.
Okay, that means you've got a lot of virtue between you. You've been good to each other in the past, and you've got to say in this life you've got a crummy relationship with somebody. It could be your mum. It's because you've been mean to them in the past. It's very simple.
Okay.
The only reason they're mean to you is if you've been mean to them. And the only reason someone's kind to you is because you've been kind to them.
To them.
This is the karma that's, Sue, this is the karma. There's 4 ways our karma ripens. The first is the human life you've got. The second is the kind of mind you've got in that human body, your mind, your tendencies, your goodness and your badness and your love and your compassion, you're being good at music or football, all your tendencies. That's the second way your karma ripens. But the third one is what we're talking about here, is how you have your relationships. We can see in our life, some people are mean to us and some people are kind to us. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
That's called experiences similar to the cause. So they're very personal. Our relationships are very intense. So if someone loves you and kind to you and gives you things and thinks you're gorgeous, that's the fruit of your past actions like that. And if someone's been mean to you, including your mum, it's because you've been like that to her.
Okay. Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes. Thanks.
Clear? Helps?
Clear?
Yeah. Oh, sweet. Fine. Good.
Okay.
Thanks. Good. Go on. Next one. Yes, Rain.
The next one's kind of got 2 bits to it.
Yep.
So if wanting the Vegemite is an attachment and we still want to eat, are you saying that as long as our intention is one of appreciation and bodhicitta, then it's okay to have the Vegemite?
Oh my God, yes, it's incredible action. And this is where we've got to talk. And I think we'll have a break first. And now we'll get to the crunch when I keep promising I'll talk about the power of motivation, what it means, and how actually, which is what's implied by that question, that the motivation that impels what we do is the main factor that determines the character of what we do. That is to say, it determines the seed that we will plant in our mind and whether or not it ripens as happiness or suffering. The key factor is the motivation. We'll discuss it after our break. But what's the second part of the question?
It also speaks to motivation. It says, can you say that as long as your intention to euthanize an animal is one of appreciation for the ability to do it and want to stop the suffering, that it is not going to be a bad karma to do it?
I understand. So let's have a break first and we'll go into that after the break. I'll just have 5 minutes, okay?
Yep.
See you in 5 minutes.
Wonderful.
Okay, sweethearts.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone. Back at 10 past 11.
Okay. All here. So let's look at that question. I think it'd be good if I have a conversation with a person. Are they there? They might.
They've just joined us from YouTube and they're with us
Who
now.
asked the question?
I'll-
Sorry.
The name is Robin Gomez.
Robin, it's me.
Who is it?
It's me.
Which
I'm
me is it?
waving. I'm waving.
Yeah, what's your name?
Robin Gomez.
Robin. I have to look for you first, Robin. Where are you, darling? I can't see you.
Headphones, Venable.
I've got to look for Robin. I can't see her. Oh, there you go. Hi, Robin. So let's have a conversation, darling. Okay. Now, first of all, would you agree that actions we do have consequences? Would you agree with that?
Yes, yes.
Okay,
Definitely.
good. So in the case of, for example, doing something for another person, then that will have consequences for that person, won't it? As well as for ourselves. The Buddha's saying
Yes.
it will also have consequences for us. Remembering the
Yes.
point is this. So there are two things going on here. So let's use a simple example first, Robin. Let's say I've got a terrible headache. I keep losing. Oh, there you are. You're moving. I've got a terrible headache. So you want to help me. So there's you with compassion, and you've got a really pure motivation. You intend to help me, and you've got a really pure motivation. You have such compassion for me. And you've got a pill, but you don't remember whether it's the aspirin or the cyanide, but you really mean well. Your motivation is really pure. You can imagine that's possible, Robin, isn't it? Your heart is full of compassion, but you don't realize the terrible mistake you made, and I die an agonizing death. Now, there are two things going on. One is the consequence for me, but one is the consequence for you. Then you would not create negative karma, really, because you truly meant well, and you thought it was the right pill. Can you imagine that?
Yes. Yeah.
So for you, quote unquote, it's okay. But the point of your giving me the pill was what? To help me, wasn't it?
Yes. The
Would you
intention
agree
was
with
good.
that? So you might, no, that's not what I'm saying. No, so don't use the word intention either. We can say it like that. There's two things going on. Intent, I should have looked into this first. There's a way we create karma. There's two things. One is intention, which is the thought. I want to help. I will give Robina a pill. And the reason is your compassion. So the motivation is the compassion. The intention is I will give her a pill. And the reason behind it is your incredible compassion, because you want me to be free of suffering. So your motivation is very pure. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
So then there's a consequence for me, isn't there? So what if, you give me the wrong pill by accident and I die a terrible death? So you could say you don't create negative karma at all, practically not, because you really did mean well, but you didn't have enough wisdom. So, but look at the result for me. You should be devastated because you really wanted to help me, but you wouldn't just go, oh, well, it's not my fault, I meant well. You'd be terribly sad that you made a foolish mistake. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
So and the real lesson here is motivation is crucial, but it's not enough. As Dalai Lama says, compassion is not enough. You've got to have wisdom to know how to help somebody. You get that, right?
Yes.
Okay, now let's use the example of killing your doggy or your pussycat or your grandma for that matter. Do you understand? So now
Yes.
that's your question, isn't it?
Yes.
That's exactly the same scenario. But here we've got to factor in the Buddha's view that pussycat or your grandmother, their consciousness will continue and will take another rebirth. That's the Buddhist view. I'm not asking you to believe this. I'm just telling you the Buddha's view. Do you understand? In other words, so the same scenario for you, you've got real compassion and your grandmother is suffering and you see she's suffering and you want to end that particular suffering. So you decide to give her a pill. You agree with you see my point here? Again,
Yes.
your compassion is huge, but the Buddha would say your grandma, at the time before she stops breathing, and the death process is very specific, at the time she stops breathing, depending on how her mind is, the particular karmic seed that will determine her next life will be triggered at the time she stops breathing, around about then. Now, and the fact is, you do not know with certainty, do you, whether she'll take a happy rebirth or a suffering rebirth. You can't say that with certainty, can you? So it's a bit like Russian roulette with the pill for me. You understand? You mean well, but let's say your grandma's mind is freaking out and a negative karmic seed is triggered, and then she dies and you killed her and she takes a terrible suffering life, much worse than the suffering she has now, well, then you haven't helped her, have you?
No.
You get my point?
Okay.
So
The actual
that's,
question.
no, wait a minute, Robin. That's the Buddhist approach. So that was your question. You said if you have a good intention, is euthanasia okay?
Yeah.
You asked
Okay.
that. But if I
Yes,
ask,
I did.
so what's your question then? That's not the question.
Well, just the background to it. We're talking about really.
No, forget the background. Euthanasia is killing an animal or a person, isn't it?
Yeah, but also with the giving the knowledge to someone on how to do it.
What?
It's just
Yes,
what we're talking about
it's even more. It's even more, darling. That's even worse. It's like I had an abortion, but I had to get a doctor to do it for me. So you decide you want to help a person kill themselves. Now, I'm not saying that's not a bad thing, because your compassion is very pure, and the person is also really, but you don't know their motivation. You don't know the scenario. You don't know their mind, and you can't guarantee that they will die without negativity, and you can't guarantee that they will not take another suffering rebirth. Given the Buddhist, all we're doing is discussing the Buddhist view here. I'm not asking you to buy into it. So, but can you see how there is a possibility, if you take the Buddhist view, that the person could die a terribly sad death and they could get a really suffering rebirth? That's the point we're discussing. So the point is, it's not, if you have the wisdom to know exactly that person's mind, and you are confident that helping them die will guarantee they'll get a really good rebirth, then of course it's a perfect action. But the point is, we don't have that wisdom. Can you hear the point I'm making?
Okay, all right.
So
even if it's
good
their
intention is
choice.
not enough. Motivation, pardon, darling?
Even if it's their choice,
What's that got? No, Robin, wait. What's that got to do with it? Let's say I'm really depressed and violently angry and I want to kill myself, and I want to run in front of a car on the freeway and die a terrible death. I don't think you'd let me do that. You would stop me. Would you think that's true?
Yeah.
Why?
Yes, yeah.
Why would you stop me?
Because you're making the decision uninformed. You're not.
And
you're making it with the wrong mind.
I mean, I might not die, but I might break all my legs and smash my head and have a terrible, terrible suffering. You wouldn't want me to suffer. Well, this is the point about reincarnation. I mean, we don't have that view in our culture. We just don't have it. It's not a very strong thing for us about reincarnation. But the Buddha's view is the way we die. To get another human birth, the mind has to be very stable. You've got to be very virtuous. You've got to have compassion and wisdom and feel very clear. And I think anyone who wants, I mean, it's not a judgmental thing. It's only because we don't have the wisdom to be certain of the consequences for the person who will die. The fact that they want it isn't the issue. It's not the point. I'm not trying to say you become a policeman. And I'm not trying to say you should, if a person wants to do it, you can't stop them. You're not going to put them in prison and tie their hands but it's the whole point of looking into the whole, if you're interested, looking into the view of reincarnation and the consequences of that action. The fact that if a person wants to put in, heroin into their veins, no one says, oh, but they wanted to do it, so I tried to help them. You wouldn't do that because there are suffering consequences of heroin. There are suffering consequences of eating cyanide. There are suffering consequences of running across a freeway. But we don't think of it as suffering consequences, meaning another life, because we can't see it. So it's a bit more abstract for us. You seeing the point, Robin?
Okay, yeah. Yeah,
I'm asking you to accept it even. I'm trying to give you the Buddhist logic, that's all.
Yeah, no, I can see that side. It was even if it's I suppose it doesn't matter if it's an older person that was going to die in 10 days time as opposed to dying.
No, you see, the only reason
is
is because our mind changes moment by moment. And you see, it's not a judgmental thing. You shouldn't help a person die. It's more knowing their mind, because the Buddhist explanation of how we die is really very specific. It's quite unique to the Buddhist approach. And the crucial point is, in this book I edited of Lama Zopa's teachings, the whole book is about how to help people to die well. Why? He said the point of in this life, He said, when a person needs us most is at the time they literally die. And the help we need to give a person, and this has nothing to do with killing or not killing, just hear the words, the help they need, because death for most people is very fearful. The way the death process happens, as you get closer to death, the mind gets much more grasping, much more attached, much more clinging, and much more fearful. This is very natural. This is why it's so important to help a person navigate this and help them become peaceful. And so then when your mind is freaking out, and then when the karmic seed is triggered at that time, the karmic seed that will be triggered that will determine your next life will be a negative one. If your mind is peaceful and virtuous, and you know, and you're dying with a very peaceful mind, then your mind will be, then that'll trigger a virtuous karmic seed, which means you'll get a good rebirth. That's how they talk. So it's not an easy topic. It's something to think about and look into, you know. And it doesn't follow that a person who dies naturally will get a good rebirth. And it doesn't even follow if a person out of real compassion, let's say, decides to end their life. It doesn't follow that they'll get a suffering rebirth. It's only because we just don't have the wisdom to know is the real reason behind it. You with me or not, Robin?
Yeah.
Okay, good, good. And I'm not trying to criticize or judge or tell you what to do. I'm just giving you the thinking, you know. And the thing is, it's like, I mean, the Buddhist view is every second counts. So every moment a person is still alive, that by having a positive thought, by thinking good things, by having some compassion, that can help change their mind. And that could be the difference of 1 minute, dying now or dying a minute later. The key thing is to help a person's mind be peaceful and virtuous and full and content. And often I think a person, I mean, I don't know, I can't judge everybody, but I would sense that the reason behind why we want to die is not joy, is not bliss, is not compassion. It's very rarely that. It's mostly despair, and the suffering is unbearable and the mind is depressed. I'm not sure. Would you agree with that, Robin? What do you think? I mean, people might disagree. I'm just thinking.
Yeah, this particular person, which was actually my mother, you know, had made up her mind that she wanted to
So you
die.
helped her die. You helped her die.
I gave her the knowledge. Like, she didn't understand that she was taking medication that was keeping her alive, and she'd gotten to the stage where she needed a blood transfusion every single day to stay alive.
Yes. So what did your experience? Because it might be different. So tell us your experience.
Well, my experience was I told her that she needed to, if she wanted to die, then she needed to stop the medication. She needed to say that she didn't want the blood transfusions anymore, and that she was ready. And it took about 10 days after that.
That's not quite the same. That's kind of has got a variation on it. That's a very common thing now, isn't it? Because we have so many drugs to keep people alive artificially that it's almost like we are having to kill people by not giving them the drugs, which is exactly the case with your mummy. So if the person, many people say, do not resuscitate or don't give me those drugs. That's not quite the same as saying I'm going to kill myself. So how was her mind? Talk about it.
Well, I was with her that morning. She'd gone through hallucinations the night before when my brother was there, but I arrived. She seemed very happy to see me. Good. And then she just slowly drifted, and I sat with her the whole time, and I was doing 100.
Did you do prayers and mantras and things? Did you know things like that?
The only one that I knew was the 100-syllable Vajrayana.
So you reciting that?
Yeah, I was reciting that to her.
Okay, that's amazing. That's a different scenario. That's amazing. That is such a blessing for her. So it's not quite the same as, you know, being depressed and suicidal and wanting to kill yourself out of despair and grief, you know. It was more like, and that's a common thing people do now, don't resuscitate me, don't give me the drugs. But if her mind, she had 10 days and she was peaceful and you were reciting mantras, that's amazing. That's very special, Robin. That's not quite the same.
And I even asked one of the nurses if, because I think she was Buddhist, and I said to her, can you recite whatever it is that you do, you know, when someone's dying? And
that's really special then. That's wonderful, Robin. That's because every scenario is slightly different, you know. Like you gave, as a general question, but your particular experience, you're very, you know, your mummy was very fortunate.
Okay.
That's wonderful. You really helped her. That's wonderful. Thank you, Robin.
I like to think I did, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you, darling. Thank you so much. What else then? Rain.
Thanks, Robin. Thank you so much, Venerable Robina. I had a question about the reference to emptiness when you talked about the kindness of all sentient beings in getting the things we need. Can you explain a little bit more?
So that we, let's just use our last 20, 35 minutes talking about wisdom. So the whole path, this path from junior school to high school to university to postgraduate so we're up to the university level now, and we've got body chi. So we've talked about karma, getting renunciation of giving up suffering, rebirths, and controlling our body and speech. Then we went to high school, and the middle scope, we started to look into our minds and unpacked and unraveled the illusions and tried to give up attachment. And now we got to the compassion wing, where we've developed on equanimity. We got to love, compassion, great compassion. We got bodhicitta. We just went through quickly, right? This outrageous shift in the mind. And now the next stage of practice is the 6 perfections of the bodhisattva. And the last 2 of those, so you bop around from life after life after life, practicing the first 4 in relation to sentient beings, accumulating bucket loads of virtuous karma, connecting with sentient beings life after life, accumulating massive bodhicitta. You can practice generosity, morality, patience, and perseverance. Then in your meditation seat, you practice wisdom, the last 2 of the 6 perfections, concentration meditation. And then on the basis of getting single-pointed concentration, you use that powerful focus to get insight into how reality exists finally, which is what cuts the root of all the nonsense. So it's the combination then of bodhicitta and wisdom. So let's look at that. So all the way along, from beginning up to here, the Buddha's general approach is that we're seeing things wrongly. We've got misconceptions. We've got the emotional, neurotic, deluded misconceptions like attachment and anger and jealousy. But he also suggests we have other misconceptions that are really philosophical views that he says aren't real. He's not trying to be fundamentalist or sectarian. He says our mind is not the brain. That's a misconception. He says we do not have a thing called a soul. That's a misconception. He says we do not begin in our mother's womb. That's a misconception. He says we are not created by a superior being. That's a misconception. He says karma is the law that runs the universe. He says the mind is what we have, and it's got these subtler levels and got this marvelous potential. It's got a very different world view. So he's not forcing it down our throat. He's not telling us to believe it. He is saying the extent to which our mind is caught up in believing things that aren't true is why we suffer. So what we're doing from A to Z on the Buddhist path is unpacking and unraveling our misconceptions and choosing, if we do choose, to buy into Buddha's take on the universe. And then we will see from our own experience whether he's right or not. We'll get the proof of the pudding. So all this leads to the deepest work, by calming our body and speech down, then by calming our mind down, then by opening our mind even more and having incredible compassion. Our mind is ready now to work on this amazing bodhisattva path and practice in our daily life in relation to others, accumulating bucket loads of merit, and then in our meditation, smashing ego grasping, the root delusion. So when I mentioned, about, what did I mention? What was debate? Oh yeah, all beings are kind. I said it's based on the logic of dependent arising. So that's you see. So Buddha in the framework here, the framework we'll use here for understanding how things exist finally, because we've talking about how things exist from day one. But here, the final way, the subtlest way, the most primordial way that things actually exist. The way to look into this is in terms of the 2 truths. So everything that exists, Buddha says, has a conventional character, has a function, and exists. So we need to get clear about things first conventionally. And that's already a good start. So, we establish things that exist. A lamp, an iPad, a computer, a Buddha statue, a person, glasses. The world we can see is full of trillions of different phenomena. When you first study Buddhist philosophy, you learn the universe consists of various phenomena, and there's various synonyms there, and one of them is very tasty. So there's the word phenomenon, the word object of knowledge, the word existent, the word established base. These terms, 5 of them, they're all synonyms for whatever exists. So now the definition of an existent is that which can be cognized by mind. So in Buddhism, it is axiomatic that which can be cognized by mind, that is to say a valid cognition, is that by definition which exists. And whatever exists is that which can be cognized by mind. So then there cannot be such a thing in the universe, as far as Buddha is concerned, that can't be cognized by your mind. That's the view. I mean, that's a shocking view for Christianity, because God is the boss. God runs the universe. God is the boss, and God knows everything. And you would never say you know everything, and you would never try to become God. That's the worst neurotic crime you could have. But that's the difference in Buddhism. We don't need a creator to create us. We don't need to be made by someone else. There is nothing that is mysterious. Everything is cognizable. If you have mind, you've created everything anyway. So it's a very powerful view. So our job is to get good, valid cognition, to rip out the lies from our mind that are leading us up garden paths and making us neurotic and ridiculous and being reborn in dumb lives. So we first have to establish the conventional reality of something. So the shorthand for that is dependent arising, interdependence. And that was the example we used. It's logical, we can see it, that there's nothing that we have experienced in our life from the second of conception that hasn't depended on other sentient beings. I mean, it's not just dependent on sentient beings, but the point here is to have compassion. So we were thinking of the sentient beings component. It's also dependent on other things. But there's nothing that we've existed. There's nothing we've ever had that's even our own body. It's a combination of the work of countless sentient beings. That's dependent arising. So that's conventional reality. Everything exists in dependence upon various factors. So there's thousands of ways in which things are interdependent. But the Buddha, in his discussion, in his debates with the previous views at the time, these Hindu views, and there are many variations of those before he came along. He got educated in that system. He went as far as he could go. He disagreed with their conclusions, so he diverged in his own direction. And as His Holiness said, it was these amazing Indians more than 3,000 years ago who were the ones who began the investigation into the nature of self. And then Buddha, in relation to his own experiential findings about the nature of self, that's when he diverged in his own direction. Specifically in relation to his own direct experiential findings about the nature of self. That's where he differed. So he's got three essential arguments, and there's many variations of these, so I'll kind of conflate them a little bit, the first two at least. So the first one, the first level of dependent arising is that everything exists in dependence upon causes. Well, we learn about that back in karma. Everything that you are is the fruit of your causes. You're not just some innocent victim. You didn't just kind of pop up out of nowhere, which is the view of believing there's no cause and effect. It's like demented, you know. So the first level of dependent arising is that things exist in dependence upon causes. A lamp is nothing other than the coming together of many causes. And you won't find a lamp among any of those causes because it's the culmination of those causes. The second level, and let's discuss this one. I'd like to discuss this one. That you know, lamp or anything else, but let's use the example of a person. Let's use the example of a person called me. Each of us is our own me, right? So the word I, the word me, the word person, the word myself, all these words, they're synonymous. They all refer to the same type of phenomenon, a person. Buddha is a person. A hell being is a person. They're an I, they're a self, they're a person. So we're that type of phenomenon. We're not a lamp, we're not a toilet, we're not an iPad. So we have to have the definition. So this is why first you've got to establish something as existing. If you don't know what an iPad is, how can you talk about an iPad? You've got to know what's the definition of an iPad, Robina? Or what's the definition of this, you know? Oh, that's a thermos. What is it, mummy? Well, you've got two parts to a definition. The first part tells you its conventional characteristics, this flat bottom metal container. You can see that, you'll learn that, but you don't know what it is yet. And this is the crucial piece. This is incredibly important to understand in order to get to emptiness. But mummy, what does it do? What's its function? What's its job? What's its meaning? Oh, honey, it keeps my tea warm. Now we know what a thermos is. Now we can begin to discuss it. But you first establish what it is. And that's why at least we've got to start getting things right conventionally. I mean, right now, Buddha says we're living in la-la land even conventionally. With our gross delusions called attachment and anger, I really believe that what's on that plate is a delicious cake that'll make me happy. That's not true. That's not the cake even conventionally that exists. So we haven't even got conventional reality correct. We're living in la-la land in relation to conventional reality, not to mention ultimate. So we sort that out in high school, get a bit of sense of what is existing and what's not. and stop buying into all the delusions and nonsense, the branch delusions. So here we establish what exists. We're a person. The definition of a person is a peculiar one in Buddhism, one that creates actions. So I think that's what the definition is. So we're one of those. So now let's investigate how that phenomenon exists. And the way we have to look at it is in the framework of how we think it exists. We're up the garden. You can't be up a garden creek without a paddle. You're up a garden path without a paddle. You're up the creek without a paddle, aren't you? Yeah. We're up the garden path or up the creek without a paddle. We haven't got clarity about what we think we are. And we can see this already by looking at attachment and anger. I hate myself. I'm bad. I'm fat. I'm ugly. I'm useless. That's because we're seeing ourselves through the lenses of anger. We don't get ourselves even accurate. So we start to work on ourselves with body, speech, and mind, get ourselves a bit reasonable, conventionally. Now we're ready to look into the nature of the self, So, okay. The second level of dependent arising is that everything that exists, but we're talking about the I in particular here, the person, exists. The first one is exists independence on causes. Here, the I exists on the cup and the lamp as well, in terms of existing independence upon its bits and pieces, its parts, It's existing independence upon its bits and pieces, its parts. So this is a really tasty one to do, I tell you. It's a really delicious analysis to do. So we know everything consists of parts. There's nothing special. I always use IKEA as a great example. You can see it vividly, You get a box with a bunch of screws, a bunch of bits and pieces, and you can't see a table there, but you get the instructions, and if you follow the instructions, you end up with a table. So it's a really good example of dependent arising. A table exists independence upon its parts. Now, think of us as like a package, and you come in your box from IKEA. You're going to have thousands of parts, aren't you? All the bits of the body and all the bits of the mind. Think about it. You're going to have millions of bits. And this is a really interesting point. This type of analysis of dependent arising, you've got to be very accurate. So when you get your package for the table or the shelf in IKEA, you've got exactly the number of screws. They don't just chuck in 47 screws and cross their fingers. It's very precise. You get exactly the right screws, exactly the right little kind of thing, exactly the right measurement, and you know that. So it's really accurate. That's the analysis we have to do with dependent arising. It's about details, This is, as Lama-Yeshe says, dependent arising is the king of logics to prove emptiness. So the mind you need to use to prove emptiness isn't just some spaced out hippy-trippy mind. You've got to have a clear, precise logical analysis of details. Dependent arising is the details. So a box comes, and let's pretend there's you in there. Box called, you ordered one Robina, one me, one rain, whatever you got. So now so this is the analysis we have to do, because what Buddha's telling us is this. Because of ego grasping, we believe 40 trillion% with 40 trillion% certainty that there is all the parts, there's the eyes and the nose and the ear and the thousands of bits of the body and the bones and the ligaments. Then was the mind, we've got the bits of anger and bits of love, and there's jealousy, and there's this and there's that. There's the thousands of bits of the mind all in the IKEA box, and there's the thousands of bits of the body all in the box. And we know that we're going to pull them out and we're going to construct a me. Well, we believe with complete certainty that there's a very special part that you probably have to put in at the end, a very special part without which you wouldn't be me. And that part is called me. A little mini me in there. You've got when you've got all the bits together, you've got the body, the mind together, all the bits and pieces, the anger, the love, the jealousy. There's your complete package of me. But you think, where's the me? Where's the inherent me? Where's the special part? Like my friend Pende says, that walks hand in hand with the other parts. It's like the boss part. It's like you put the me in there and then you become a real person. Buddha says, don't be ridiculous. You don't need one of those bits. There's no such thing as a separate me. There's no such thing as a me that's independent and separate from the parts. The parts do fine being me. But we think there's an extra piece that's necessary. And when we talk, we believe it. I own a hand and a nose and anger and love. I am this. You did that to me. And we feel there's a special piece in here somewhere that really does exist, that's the owner of the body and the mind. Buddha says, don't be silly. Don't need such a piece. The bits and pieces do fine on their own. This is like absurd for us. So they didn't leave behind any piece. You only need the body and the mind. You don't need more. So then you go, well, what the hell is me anyway? Well, that's the third one. We'll go back to say briefly. The third one is that the me is just the label you use out of convenience on those bits and pieces. But we've over exaggerated the me. We've embellished the me. We believe there's an intrinsic me in there. That's there's two mistakes we make, and the one we're discussing now, the one that's typical is the owner, the person who, the I that owns the hand. We say, I have a hand. So this is the logical analysis we have to do. They talk about one particular logical analysis is, if there's something exists, there's got to be one thing. And if it's one, and if it's more than one, then it's more than one. You can't have it both ways. So let's do a little analysis to prove this one. We're trying to disprove here that there is a separate thing called me that owns the body and the mind, which is how we talk. I have a hand. I have a nose. Oh, I have anger. That's two nouns there. It's two things, right? I and a hand. So, okay, I will give a simple example of a valid statement. Then I say, I have an iPad and a thermos. So then, and this is now getting back to what exists and what doesn't. I just stated three phenomena, did I not? I is the name given to this phenomenon. Have an iPad, that's the name given to that phenomenon. Have a thermos, the third phenomenon. So I just stated then three phenomena, three nouns, well, one's a pronoun. So it's logical and evident and obvious that if you want to prove that I spoke the truth, you have to point out three, in this case, very simple, separate and independent phenomena. So independent here means that they don't depend upon each other for their existence. So if my iPad breaks, my thermos will work fine. There's no relationship. And this word relationship is massively important in the Buddhist discussion about emptiness. There's no relationship. There's not only they're independent of each other, but they're separate as well. So you've got to point out three separate and independent phenomena. It's easy. There's a thermos that does not depend on an iPad for its existence. There's a Robina that does not depend upon an iPad or a thermos for her existence. And there's an iPad that doesn't depend upon a Robina and a thermos. So it's easy. There's three separate and independent phenomena. That's easy. Now let's get a bit more nuanced, a bit more subtle. I have a nose and an ear. So without analysis, you can see it's true. Have a look. There's the nose. There's the ear. No argument. With any analysis, it's good enough. But the Buddha says we need to do analysis, because when we make that statement, we make two mistakes. Either, this first one, that when we say the word I, we believe there's something in here, intrinsic and specific, that is the referent object of that word I. So in the same way, when we say ear, there it is. There it is, you can prove it. There is an ear, and the ear is not the nose, and the nose is not the ear. And in terms of their existence, their function, they don't depend on each other at all. I don't need an ear to blow my nose. I don't need a nose to hear things. So in that sense, they are both separate and independent. But now the third phenomenon, I. We assume it has equal status with the ear and the nose. There's a little piece in there somewhere. And if you're a Christian, you'll call it a soul. If you're a Hindu, you'll call it an Atman, a self. If you're a Greek, you'll call it an essence. This is the commonest view in most philosophies. There's something intrinsic there. Buddha says, no, you will not find such a thing. So, and this is the proof. This is the proof, very simple. If there were a third component in here, apart from the ear, apart from the nose, apart from the other thousands of bits, then just in the same way that when my thermos breaks, when my iPad breaks, my thermos won't mind. In the same way, if there were that separate, independent little kind of component called an I, that is like the mini-me that runs the show, then when the nose gets hurt, the I will look on and go, oh, phew, I'm glad it wasn't me, and will have pity for the poor nose. You know, that will be just the same. It won't be, the I will not be affected if it was separate, in the same way that the iPad is not affected if the thermos breaks. But it's not like that. We know it's not like that. So then what we say, I am in pain. So like if, you know, say Rain insults my nose, you've got such an ugly nose, Robina. And I'll say, how dare you insult me? And accurately, he should say, Robina, I didn't insult you, I insulted your nose. But we don't have that kind of precision, do we? Because we just assume there's a piece in there. We're giving extra status to this piece in there. So what is the I if it's not a separate thing? Because we know there is an I somehow. Well, it's not, it is not the same as the nose and the ear, but you can't separate it. So it's a more subtle understanding of there is a dependent relationship. It's not like the thermos and the iPad when they're separate and independent. No, the I is completely dependent upon the parts, but you won't find an I among the parts. That's the thing to think about. It's more nuanced, it's more tricky. So the interesting thing is this. As His Holiness, this is the first step of the analysis. And if we stay here, then when we go, there is no I. We are accurate. There's no independent I. But if we just stay there, we become nihilistic. And this is the major mistake in people's understanding of emptiness. You know, in other words, as His Holiness says, you start analyzing the I, looking for the I, and you throw out the nose, you throw out the ear, you throw out all the bits of the mind, and you have all these piles of phenomena, and you will have a pile of different phenomena. So you say, oh, well, there's no I there. That's nihilism, and that's not the meaning of emptiness. We haven't gone far enough. So as His Holiness says, the I isn't empty. We've got to look at that word in a minute. We've got time. Because you can't find it. And you won't find it. But that's not the real premise. The I is empty of existing from its own side because it's a dependent arising. So let's look at the word emptiness. We get very confused. Right back, like I said before, you start with understanding that everything that exists is a phenomenon, and a thing that's a phenomenon can be cognized by the mind. So that the direct relationship between the mind, which is subject, and the thing that it cognizes. And if mind has any cognition, it has to have a thing it cognizes. The mind just can't exist without a cognition. That's schizophrenic. Whatever level of mind we have, it's going to cognize something. And whatever the mind cognizes is a phenomenon, an object, an existent, an established base, if it's a valid cognition. So, emptiness is a negating word, isn't it? And we use it in daily life. I'll pick up my thermos, about to drink, and I'll go, oh, it's empty. So we know it means empty of tea. Pretty straightforward. You look in your bank account and you go, oh my God, my bank's empty. You mean there's no dollars there? We use the term very casually. So we understand the meaning. Now, this is a part that we don't, this is where we don't use the word properly. This is where we don't use the word though. So like, in other words, okay, so there's two things here. One is, if there is tea in my thermos, we all understand that tea is a phenomenon that does exist. In general, and specifically, if it's in my cup, there is an object of knowledge, there is an existent called tea. So my mind, when it observes that shape and color, and then I go, oh, that's tea, then my mind cognizes the phenomenon called tea. Very simple. So now, and this is the point, I'm expecting tea in my thermos. I'm expecting it. And when I go to drink it, I get a shock. And I'll say, oh, my cup's empty. My thermos is empty. But put it another way, my mind just cognized something, didn't it? It was expecting tea, but what did it find instead? The absence of tea. So that the object that my mind cognized, correctly speaking, is a negative phenomenon. It's called the absence of tea. Another word for absence is emptiness. The emptiness of tea. That's the name of the phenomenon that my mind cognized. We'll say, oh, my cup's empty, but you make it a phenomenon, make it a noun, and it's called the emptiness of tea. We don't talk like that, but we can hear it, and this is a crucial point to understand. This is how the mind cognizes things. It always cognizes a phenomenon, an action, an event, a thing. Well, the absence of tea is a real phenomenon for my mind. And this is the interesting point. The only person who would cognize the absence of tea in their cup is a person who expects tea. You don't walk into the crockery shop and look in the cups and go, oh, mummy, the cups are all empty, because you don't expect tea in a crockery shop. So the only person in this particular discussion, the only person who will cognize the absence of your precious $5,000 is the person who expected $5,000 in the bank. The only person who will cognize the absence of tea is the person who expected tea. So like you rush to the drawer to get your keys to rush off to work, and you open the drawer. Now, if you ask me to look in that, this is the big difference now, how emptiness isn't nihilism, isn't nothing. If you ask me to look in the drawer, which is an empty drawer, what I will see in that drawer is nothing. That's nihilism. Listen to this. You expect your car keys. So when you look in the drawer, what you observe is nothing, but what the object you just cognized is the absence of your car keys. It's so vivid for your mind. You know, if I look in the cup and don't expect tea, I will see nothing. That's nihilism. If I don't expect $5,000 in the bank and I just see a zero, that's nihilism. There are no dollars, but that's not the meaning of emptiness. Emptiness is the absence of the precious $5,000 that you thought was there. The emptiness of tea is the object you cognize when you thought there'd be tea there. Well, when you get to the subtle level of concentration with shamatha, and after countless lifetimes of hard work and working on the lam rim and unpacking and unraveling your mind and meditating by using dependent arising, and you're looking for the intrinsic I in here somewhere. And at some point in your subtlety of concentration, for the first time, you will cognize the truth of the absence of that precious I that you have believed in since beginningless time. So merely chucking out the bits and pieces of the mind and the body, and you will not find an I. We only go as far as that, and that's nihilism. And that's the commonest misunderstanding about emptiness. And that is not the real premise. So when you look, so that again, look at this. Rain believes there's $5,000 in his bank, completely convinced it's there. He knows he saved it. He says, Robina, look at my bank account for me, would you? And I have no expectation of anything. I will see the truth. $0. Now that's nihilism. Now so the object that I cognize is $0. What's the object he cognizes when he looks in the bank and sees a zero? The object he cognizes is the absence of $5,000. Absence of $5,000 and $0 are not the same object. So this is the proof that when you just look for the I, chuck out all the bits, that's part of the work you have to do, but you've got to keep going. And then you will find you will then discover dependent arising, which is the absence. You'll first see the absence of this precious I that you have believed in since beginningless time. And you will see for the first time that the absence, the emptiness, the lack of that I that has never, doesn't, and could never exist. It's a much more radical absence. Tea could exist. $5,000 could exist. Keys could exist. But this is a radical absence. It's a thing that could never exist. It's a complete fabrication, has no basis in reality. And Lama Zopa says the greatest yogis, nearly the best yogis, have unbelievable fear when they first see the absence of the fantasy I. But the best yogis have complete bliss and joy. So now, 5 minutes of questions. Come on.
Thanks, Venerable. We have a question from Fernando who would like to ask you. Fernando, are you with us?
Is it about
the question? Hello, Venerable Robina.
Is it about emptiness? I want questions about emptiness.
It is, yeah.
Yes,
Good.
it was about emptiness.
Okay,
There are two things that in which I have tried to understand emptiness, and one is the one about the interdependence of every object or phenomena, and the other one, it's when you only recognize an object as merely labeled by the mind. And in that sense, I relate it to the Chittamatra school, which is only mind.
Sorry, what? You only what? What's the last bit? What? You what?
When I consider emptiness on the aspect of being an object merely labeled by the mind, then I think about the Chittamatra or only mind school, which it says that.
All right, no, but I'm not discussing the Chittamatra view here.
I know.
We're discussing the Prasangika view. So what's the question?
Yeah. The thing is that I cannot cognize or put both those ideas together.
Which pieces can't you put together, Fernando?
The interdependence of everything and the emptiness of.
Okay, good. Listen. Okay, good. Listen. Okay, good. This is the point you have to get to. You know that. This is the point. Right now, when we hear emptiness, we hear nothingness. Then when we hear dependent arising, we hear somethingness. And this is like this contradiction. So what we have to do is think that you have just discovered, as His Holiness said, okay, you can hear the one about first looking for the I in here among the parts. You hear that one so far.
Yeah.
And you can see with analysis that you won't find a separate I. You can find an ear and a nose and an eye and a tongue and a pee-pee and a caca and mind and anger and love, but you won't find a specific piece called self. Are you accepting that?
Yeah, I accept it.
Okay, good. So if you stay there, that's nihilism. And that's not the answer. And you've affirmed, and that's the view, including Chittamatra, they affirm there is a body and mind. And you've just affirmed there is something that bears the label I, but you haven't gone far enough yet. That's still self-existence. So you've got to go further, and you've got to go, you realize the absence, not just there is no I that you can't see, but you realize not just there's no peace there and you just find a big space, like you look in the drawer and there's no keys. That's what I would see, because I don't expect keys. But you know, expecting your keys, you're expecting your keys, and you will see the absence of keys. And that's not the same as no I. So when you've realized that I is merely the label for that we put on the parts, that's merely labeled. That's merely labeled. So when you're a yogi and you're absorbed in perfect meditation on the absence of the intrinsic I, that's all you are realizing. And then you come out of meditation and you bop around the world and you see toilets and things and lamps and cups, but you don't believe in them. But you know there's no inherent cup either, as well as there's no inherent I. The cup also is merely labeled. But nevertheless, when you pick it up, you will still get your tea from it. It functions exactly as how you established it, but there's no cup from its own side. Cup is merely labeled. There's no I from its own side, but you still function as Fernando. You don't turn into nothing when you realized emptiness. Fernando still exists as a dependent arising Fernando. So these two go together. You can't separate them. When you realized emptiness of independent Fernando, you have just realized dependent arising Fernando. You can't have emptiness on its own. That's nihilism. So as soon as you hear there is no intrinsic Fernando, you are realizing there's a merely labeled Fernando. These are the two we have to bring together.
Okay. Yeah, I'll have to work more on that.
Let's keep working on it, yeah.
Thank you. There's also this documentary on the David Bohm theory of wholeness, which it talks about.
No, I'm not interested. I don't want to know those things. I don't understand them properly, and I just get confused. I'm happy with Buddhism, okay? I know Westerners, and I'm not criticizing. I mean, Geshe Namdak in London, who teaches there, who's Dutch, he reads all these different books. Dalai Lama makes all these Geshis study the Western ones. I have no interest. I'm not being fundamentalist. I would like to just try and prove Buddha's point on its own. I think it's enough. I just get confused by the other views. I haven't studied them enough. I mean, I don't have enough knowledge. I mean, people like Alan Wallace have studied them. I haven't studied them, but I'm happy just to discuss Buddha's view on its own. I think it's a brilliant view. Why not? It can stand on its own, good enough. If you want to communicate with scientists, learn science as well. No, I'm happy to do that, but I don't know the stuff yet. So keep
Thank you
working
very
on it.
much, Robina.
Understand?
Yes, thank
Any
you
other
very much.
questions? Rain?
That's it, Venerable. No more questions.
Okay. So the point is, what's all this prove, you know? As His Holiness said, this is really the best way to finish. His Holiness said one time when someone asked him, how do you put emptiness into practice in daily life, Your Holiness? It was so simple. He said, see things from another point of view. That's dependent arising. So look, this is the point. Look how we are when we're completely caught up in ego grasping and attachment and anger and jealousy and depression. Look how we are. We can't see past our own nose. We're completely absorbed in our own self. Everything else there is either kind of paranoid, angry, ugly, depressing. There's no sense of interconnectedness at all, is there? You're just isolated and lonely and despairing in this little isolated self. That's the function of the delusions, which is rooted in ego grasping. Then when you open your mind and you become more loving and more wise and more spacious, you hear someone else and you suddenly can connect with them. That's the proof of dependent arising. You can see it from another point of view. But with ego grasping, we've got tunnel vision, can't see anything. It says, this is how it is. I'm ugly and depressed. You're not ugly and depressed, Robina. Yes, I am. We don't even know how to hear from another point of view that I might have some good qualities. We recognize this. Look at the stubbornness of ego grasping. I'm not criticizing. This is our suffering. We can't see anything else. If you are mad at somebody, you know, if you're angry with someone because they harmed you, this is the anger mind. You cannot see a single millimeter of anything other than ugliness. And you do not want to see it. That's exactly how we all are with the delusions, and they're rooted in the fundamentalism of ego grasping. So the second you can begin to find one tiny thing about your mother that was good, one tiny thing, and this is shocking, one tiny good quality in Mr. Trump or Mr. Weinstein, then you are seeing, you're understanding emptiness. It's profound, I tell you. Okay. Should we go home now? Noon on a Sunday. What do you do on noon on a Sunday in Melbourne and Sydney? Melbourne can't do much. You're locked in your houses, aren't you? Thank you very much. Okay, good.
I heard they get an extra hour today. Extended.
What's it from Robin? Robin Gomez says something. What is Robin saying?
That one. Monique Potts says, thank you very much.
Thank you, Robina.
Good, darling. It's a pleasure. What did Robin Gomez say? There was a note from Robin Gomez.
Just said thank you.
Oh, you did, darling. Did you? Okay, wonderful. I'm happy.
Thank you.
Oh, okay, then we're all finished now.
Robina.
Maybe I'll
Thank you,
see
Robina.
I'm very happy to come to Sydney again. You can
Venerable.
anytime you like, Rain.
On behalf of everyone, Venerable and Vajrayana Institute, everyone here on Zoom and YouTube, I'd like to thank you so much for this series of teachings. I'm sure everyone would agree that your potency or the message is not lost in this format. We hope that after all this craziness, you can come back to VI and for a full Gompa, hopefully next year.
Hopefully, we'll see what happens. Absolutely.
And also many people haven't expressed an interest to make an offering. I'll discuss that with you after, the best way to make that.
Yeah. Okay, good.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, darling.
Thank you.
Grow and grow. Just grow. Semcho Grimpoche. Makye Panam. Keguchi. Kepanyo Payang. Gongne. Gongne. Sobashog. And then due to this virtue of listening to these teachings and this wisdom that we had and any insights we've got, how marvelous, may I quickly become a Guru Buddha and lead all sentient beings without exception to that state. What a marvelous thought. Thank you, everybody, for all your questions, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Robina.
Thank
you.
Take care of yourself.
Much
Thank
love.
you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, darling.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Robina.
Thank you. Very well.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank
Joining
you.
us.
Thank you, Rain.
Massive love. Thanks, Rain.
Thanks,
Thank
Trish.
you, Rain.
Thanks,
I'll
Brent.
clean up the videos and the audio, and I'll let you know when it's all online. And also, I'll send you an email with a way to make offerings to Venerable Robina.
Great.
Thanks,
Enjoy
Ray.
your
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you, Rain.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Ciao.
Okay.
Bye.
Thank you all. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
I need a cup of tea.